A quorum being present, the special town meeting will come to order. We'll omit reading the return of the warrant, which shows that it was properly served. I ask that all who can rise to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'll state our customary procedural points. Since we held our annual town meeting just a few weeks ago, I'll skip many of them to keep my comments as brief as possible. There are several stationary microphones around the room. If you want to speak, please go to the mic that's nearest your seat. Wait to be recognized, and then give the meeting your name and address if we don't already have them. I'm Alan Wilson. I ask that you stand when you speak if you can, and this applies to officials at the front of the meeting as well as on the floor. The tellers also have portable mics for anyone who might have difficulty reaching the stationary ones. If that's the case, please raise your hand and we'll make sure a microphone comes to you. Speakers must remember to direct their remarks to me as moderator and not to other town officials or voters. They must also limit their remarks to 2 minutes or less unless they've received my permission in advance to speak longer. You should have picked up a card like this as you checked in. It identifies you as a voter. And if the electronic voting system should fail, heaven forbid, and we have a counted hand vote, please hold up your card to make sure you're counted. Non-voters are permitted to attend the meeting with the consent of the moderator. We have with us tonight Gregory Federspiel, Town Administrator, the heads of town departments, Pamela Bodwin, Superintendent of the Manchester-Essex Regional School District, and Michelle Randazzo, Town Council, and Jonathan Murray, both with KP Law. All these people have my permission to be here and to speak if needed. Once we've established a quorum, as we now have, I'll assume a quorum continues to be present until it's challenged and found lacking by an actual count. And as for the quorum, we don't have a lot to spare, so I hope you'll all stick with us and allow us to complete our business on every article. It's unlawful to smoke on school grounds. I ask that you turn off or mute cell phones and other electronic devices. The meeting is being videotaped by 1623 Studios and is also being recorded. I want to thank the following residents who are serving as volunteers tonight. Excuse me. The registrars of voters, Eileen Buckley and Bruce Warren. Assisting them and Town Clerk Diane Bucco are Michelle Baer, Jeff Bodmer-Turner, Muffin Driscoll, Martha Farmer, Alan Flatley, Beth Heisey, Bruce Journey, Tom Keogh, Carolyn Kelly, Judah Lespeza, Kurt Meldon, Melanie Olderman, Elaine Person, Kathy Ryan, Joanna Shan, Lee Simmons, Elaine Taylor, Chris Thomas, Christopher Thomas, Pam Thorne, Gretchen Wood, assisting me by timing speakers, and finally, but not least, Tiffany Marletta, running the electronic voting system. Thank you all for serving the town. There's a single handout containing all the warrant articles and the main motions under each one. We'll be referring to the motions in the handout and we'll be voting on them from the handout. So it's important that everyone have a copy. If you don't have it, please raise your hand and one of the tellers will get you one. We'll be voting electronically at this meeting. You should have received a keypad like this as you checked in. We're going to use the keypads for all votes. I'll announce when the voting period for each motion opens and ends. And while we're voting, a box in the upper right-hand corner of the screen behind me will also show the 15-second voting period counting down. Now, you may notice that the screen behind me isn't showing the same way it did at the annual town meeting in April. In April, we were able to shrink the image so that you could see all of it from top to bottom. Unfortunately, the school technical person who did that isn't with us today. I think he's on vacation, so we weren't able to do it. And I apologize if you're having difficulty seeing it, but there are screens around the room that display the same thing. So press 1 to vote yes, 2 to vote no, or 3 to abstain on the motion under consideration. If you change your mind, just press another button. The computer records only your last choice. When the voting period ends, the screen will show the number of yes and no votes and abstentions and also display the totals graphically. As I said, you'll also be able to see the voting display on the portable screens around the room. If you need to leave early, please exit through the lobby where you checked in and return the handset so that we can keep an accurate tally of how many voters are still here. When the meeting ends, you can exit through any of the doors. The handsets are in sleep mode until a button is pressed, so the screen will be blank until you vote. After you vote, the LED in the upper right corner will turn green, indicating that your vote was received, and the screen will display 1A for yes, 2B for no, or 3C for abstentions. The device then goes back to sleep. We'll conduct one test vote to make sure everyone is comfortable with the system. Here it is. Question: have you been to Singing Beach yet this season? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no, or 3 to abstain, and the voting period is open. And the voting is closed. The vote is 122 to 40 with 2 abstentions. I'm not sure what an abstention means there. Are there any questions about how to vote electronically? The voting system will produce an anonymous log of how each handset was used on each vote. Any voter who wishes will be able to go to the town clerk's office and determine how his or her votes were recorded. The town does not, however, create a record linking voters' names with individual handsets, so all votes are secret. That means that if you want to check your voting record with the town clerk, you'll need to save the device's identifier. It's the 6-character alphanumeric code on the back of the handset following the words device ID next to the QR code. If you have a smartphone, you can just take a photo of the back of the clicker. If there are no questions, I see none, we will go to Article 1. Article 1 concerns the appropriation for the assessment from the Manchester Essex Regional School District. And Chris Reed of the Manchester Essex Regional School Committee makes motion A as printed under Article 1 in the handout. And Erica Spencer, also of the school committee, seconds the motion. This motion A is the standard motion that we have on our warrant every time we deal with the school appropriation. All it does is meet a requirement under state law that we reaffirm the calculation in accordance with the school agreement. It's not changing anything. Is the meeting ready to vote? If you're in favor, press 1, opposed 2, abstain, press 3, and the voting period is open. Voting is closed, and it's displaying percentages. Can you change it to numbers? It's 96% in favor, but I'd like to see the absolute numbers. Bear with us for a moment. Okay. Yes, 173, no, 6, with 1 abstention. So the motion carries. And Chris Reed makes motion B as printed in the handout, and Erica Spencer seconds. Remarks, Mr. Reed.
On here. Great. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to our Select Board and Finance Committee for their continued support during this school district budget season. A school budget is more than a financial document. It's a reflection of the district's values and vision of educational excellence. Earlier this year, the school district proposed a budget with a 2.85% increase for the coming school year. This was a fiscally sound level services proposal created with the financial constraints of Manchester and Essex in mind. The original budget maintained the same program scope, class size, course offerings, and services while providing resources needed to support the MERSD strategic plan. This spending plan was supported at both Essex and Manchester town meetings, but also required approval of a Proposition 2.5 override at the ballot in Essex. That request did not receive majority support, and as a result, the school committee was asked to reduce the district budget by $781,000. After considerable deliberation, the school committee adopted a compromised budget, which includes both a reduction in staff and the use of reserve funds. This is a short-term measure that gives the district time to stabilize and regroup, to pursue a long-term solution for FY25, and to better position MERSD to maintain its future financial health and performance. I believe both Essex and Manchester value education. Our current budget challenge is not a one-year issue. We have been wrestling with structural funding issues since FY19 and have yet to determine a solution. We have significant work ahead of us, and I hope that we can return to our tradition of collaboratively addressing the issues before us. The school committee respectfully asks of your support for the FY24 budget presented this evening so we can move forward with that work of finding a long-term solution with both of our town partners. The town of Essex passed this compromised budget on Monday at their special town meeting 2 days ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Is there a discussion? I don't see any hands. Is the meeting ready to vote? If you're in favor, press 1. Opposed, press 2. 3 to abstain. Voting period is open. Voting is closed, and the vote is 187 in favor, 27 opposed, with 4 abstentions. So the motion is adopted. Article 2, and Ann Harrison moves and John Round seconds the article as presented in the warrant, concerns refurbishment of the athletic field. Remarks, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here when you could be out wondering whether your cookout is going to be rained out. It's wonderful to see so many faces at a special town meeting. And I want you to know that you are the town's legislature, and it is very important that you're here. But the question that you probably have about this article is, didn't we just vote at the last meeting $400,000 and some debt agreements, and then affirm the debt agreements in the election? Yes. This is different. What happened is that when the Finance Committee and the Select Board recognized that the school appropriation would be substantial, $491,000 less than we had already voted, the suggestion was made and adopted that we apply $400,000 of that to the borrowing for the school field. So it's a different $400,000, and it would be applied to reduce the amount of borrowing. And essentially, we have two fields. They're $800,000 each. We have an agreement that Manchester will automatically pay half of the repairs to the Coach Ed field. So there's $400,000. That's the $400,000 that you voted at the Springtown meeting. That leaves $1.2 million for all of the Highland Field and half of the Brook Street Field. And Manchester owes 63% of that $1.2 million. And that amount is going to be reduced, if we approve this article, by the $400,000 that we saved from the compromise budget.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Is there discussion? Yes, sir. Could you go to the mic, please?
John Carlson, 9 Walker Road. 2 questions. At one point, I heard that maintenance was deferred on these fields at one point to save money, and that's possibly one of the reasons why we are in the position we are now in the replacement. And the second is, given the cost of these fields, and if it is going to be a recurring cost, have we ever considered going back to grass, which eliminates the plastic, softer for the students, and doesn't it need $1.6 million after X number of years?
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. The projected life of an artificial turf field is about 8 years. The Brook Street Field is more than 10 years old, and the Highland Field is at least 10 years old, the Brook Street being older. So the fields have served as long as they would be anticipated. Back when we had grass fields, we had many fewer sports, and the fields were used much less heavily. And I remember mud and rocks at football games. So I think the school district made the decision that turf fields would give our students more students more opportunity to play, and I think that has been proven correct. For your second question, I'm sorry.
Second question was, has there been any consideration to returning to grass?
You addressed both.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Harrison, and thank you, Mr. Carlson. Yes, sir.
Tom Keogh.
Oh, I'm recognizing the gentleman over here.
Sorry.
Rick Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. Sorry. I'm a little unclear on the use of $400,000 of saving from district operating budget. So can I get a clarification on district operating budget versus? I'm unclear.
Ms. Harrison.
Okay, the district operating budget is what we just voted on. This is a capital expense for the district, which is in a different category.
So we're talking school district.
Excuse me, Mr. Rogers, would you wait for her to finish?
Sorry.
Please explain your question.
So just when we say
Just
district,
one
I want
moment,
to say it's
please,
school district.
everybody.
Yes.
Reminder, address
Through
your
you.
remarks to me.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Alan.
Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
No, I just want to be clear. District means school district. District means school district, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Keogh.
Tom Keogh, 20 Lincoln Street. I asked this question at the annual town meeting, and the answer I got at the annual town meeting has been more confused by the articles that are in the paper, in the Cricket and the Gloucester Times. And that is that we've already spent or decided to spend $400,000 at the annual town meeting. Now we were taking $400,000 from money that we do not have to spend in the district budget. And I would like to know what's the commitment for the town of Essex to pay that share, and I'd like to direct that to the chair of the school committee or vice chair of the school committee.
Mr. Reed?
So, I guess to be as clear as possible, the total replacement costs of both of the turf fields in the town of Manchester is $1.6 million. We've gotten competitive bids for that to, make sure that we're getting the best price possible on that. And we've also, to just quickly answer another question, we did deliberate quite extensively on looking at moving towards grass versus turf, and made the, from recommendations we received, made the decision to move forward with the turf fields. So of those two turf fields, the school district, by a usage agreement, is responsible for $1.2 million of those replacement costs. The town of Manchester essentially owns half of Brook Street or Coach Field. So the replacement cost for Coach Field is $800,000, Highland is $800,000. So the school district is responsible for $1.2 million of those replacement costs. The town of Manchester is responsible for $400,000. Part of the regional agreement, there's a part of the regional agreement that specifically states how the percentages work on which town and how each town pays for capital costs of the school district, which was referenced as a 63% share for Manchester. We did vote at our previous town meeting to approve the school district to borrow funds to pay for those costs. What that would do is, again, Essex would receive a bill, Manchester receives a bill, and Manchester had previously voted to fund that, or approve the school district to borrow to pay for those costs versus paying it upfront. What this will do is now reduce that 63% cost to Manchester of the school's portion of the replacement costs by an additional $400,000. So that will leave the school district with the decision to, fund a smaller amount. Essex is in the same position. Unfortunately, this has not been put on the ballot at any town meeting in Essex, so that portion of the costs or fees are still up in the air. Pam, I think I can state what so at our school committee meeting on Monday, we voted to move forward with reserve funds to fully replace both fields, with the hope that Essex will, when it comes time to pay that bill, make a decision on how they would like to fund their cost of it. Either way, we made the decision as a school committee to replace the fields now, instead of trying to break things up or maybe not do Brook Street, or there was a lot of different options available, but we decided to move forward to save costs, do both fields at the same time, make sure we weren't incurring more costs due to regional agreement nuances.
But I think Mr. Kehoe's question was, what is the commitment of the town of Essex to pay its share?
Yeah, it worries me
As of
for
today,
you
there
to
is no
say
commitment from
we're
the
going to
town of
hope.
Essex.
Excuse me.
Excuse me. It worries me, Mr. Reed, that you said we're going to hope that Essex will live up to their side of the agreement. And then that money then comes out of the reserve funds that you're trying to preserve at this point rather than spend. Because I know that on the annual town meeting and the special town meeting, there was nothing on the Essex warrants about money for the fields.
All of that is true and accurate. Yep.
Yes, sir.
Joe Valenti, 17 Crooked Lane. Question, they're building a brand-new soccer court on Pine Street. Why wasn't that money used to the turf field instead of the soccer court, which is only for soccer? This is for other sports.
Mr. Fetterfield?
So So the Pine Street field is a multi-purpose field. It can be used for a multiple array of different sporting activities. It's a smaller field. It's not a game-sized field. It's more of a practice field or game size for the younger children. So I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the.
You used the money to build a soccer court when really you needed the money for the turf field. The soccer court, that lot's been empty for years with nothing there. So why was the money wasted on that versus put towards this?
So
Mr. Fetterspiel.
Voters approved moving forward with the.
They approved it?
The voters.
Excuse me, let Mr. Fetterspiel
Right,
finish.
So the voters approved spending funds to construct a new field at the old burn dump as an additional field because the uses of our existing fields are often maxed out and there are more demand than there is field time. So the new field is designed to provide relief to some of the over demands of the existing fields. So that's why the Park and Rec Committee and the voters ultimately decided to go ahead with a third field.
Yes, sir.
Was that problem put forth before the turf field problem or after?
Well, we knew about the turf fields, certainly. So voters, I believe, were aware that ultimately they would need to contemplate additional dollars for the turf fields, even while they approved the additional field at the old burn dump.
Doesn't make sense, but you did it.
Further discussion? Yes, Mr. Fetterspiel has a comment on the Essex commitment.
So just to follow up with Mr. Keogh's question, so if Essex fails to approve any funding for the fields, it'll have to be paid out of reserve only, and our $400,000 that you're about to approve will not be used. So that $400,000 that you're contemplating tonight, it only goes against the district cost if the district proceeds to not fund it out of the reserves. So if Essex decides not to participate in funding of the fields and the school uses only their reserves, then this additional $400,000 that you're about to vote on will not be spent.
This is a little complicated. I want to be sure everybody understands it. Everybody clear? No. Yes, sir.
Fred Rossi, 17 Highwood Road. Sorry about that. Where does Mr. Fetterspiel's explanation exist in the motion in our warrant? Because I don't see that. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Fetterspiel, and it makes sense, but if we're going to vote on it, is it written as such, or am I missing it?
Mr. Fetterspiel.
So it's basically, what I just explained is embedded in the regional agreement. So you're right, it's not explicitly spelled out in this article, but it is part of the written agreement that both towns have as part of the regional district agreement. So only projects that are approved by both towns can go forward as a shared cost basis after both towns have approved those. That's part of the agreement. So it's already there in writing.
So it's a default mechanism, then, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Isabella Bates, 2 Masconomo. If I've got this clear, this is a windfall $400,000 that we get to reduce our debt under these circumstances. And it seems pretty clear to me, and I would like to move the question.
Well, I appreciate your comments, but my standing rule, which I didn't mention this time, is that someone who makes a statement on the merits can't move the question, because you can't make a statement on the merits and then close the door on other views. However, I think we're close to ending the discussion anyway. Yes, sir.
As per Mr. Carlson's point, there's more injuries on a turf field versus a grass field, and that's a fact. So I think the grass field would be fine.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Warnock. I think I know what you're going to do.
I'd like to move the question. Ken Warnock.
Thank you, Mr. Warnock. That is the motion to cut off debate. Is that seconded? Seconded. Thank you. And that's a 2/3 vote. And the voting period is open. If you're in favor of cutting off debate, press 1. Opposed, press 2. Abstain, 3. Voting's closed, and the vote is 209 yes, 29 no, and that prevails by more than 2/3. Yes. That was a previous question. Yep. I said 219. Yep. We have to reload the slide. Okay. So if you're in favor of Ms. Harrison's motion, please press 1. If you're opposed, 2. And abstain, press 3. And the voting period. Is there confusion?
We're confused about calling the question versus voting on the article.
So what we just voted on was the motion to cut off debate. Mr. Warnock moved to cut off debate for the previous question. So we voted in favor of cutting off debate. Now we have to go back and vote on Ms. Harrison's motion. Yes. Everybody clear now? Okay. We're still reloading. Okay. If you're in favor of Ms. Harrison's motion, this is a simple majority. Press 1, opposed 2, abstain, press 3, and the voting period is open. Voting is closed. It's 208 in favor, 40 opposed, with no abstentions. So the motion prevails. Article 3 is the first of 3 zoning amendments that will be before us tonight. And Sarah Creighton of the Planning Board makes the motion under Article 3 as printed in the handout, begins at page 4 and ends at page 15. And it includes lines 10 through 411. And Ron Mastrogiacomo seconds the motion. Now, this is a 2/3 vote pursuant to the Zoning Enabling Act, Chapter 40A, Section 5. Chapter 48, Section 5 also requires that the Planning Board hold a hearing on proposed zoning amendments, and that prior to adoption of such an amendment by town meeting, the Planning Board shall report to the town. Planning Board held the required hearing on this amendment and on the other 2 that follow on June 6, 2023, which was continued to June 12th. And the Planning Board recommends approval of the amendment. Remarks, Ms. Creighton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Seems like deja vu. We're here again to talk about zoning. And I, for one, and hopefully you are grateful I don't have laryngitis. We want to thank the Select Board, Town Planner Betsy Ware, Greg Federspiel, and Town Council for their help with our multi-year effort to improve our zoning. We especially want to thank you all for sticking with us through all of this. Tonight, we are updating the final section and fixing some typos. The motion under Article 3 updates the section on administration and procedures, known as Section 12. We are asking you to replace the existing Section 12 with updated language. And I'll provide a few highlights of the change. The new Section 12 details the role of the Planning Board which is absent in current zoning. It has stronger penalties for zoning violations. It strengthens our ability to secure financial guarantees of performance for certain types of projects. And it details projects that are subject to site plan review. Now, the Planning Board regularly uses site plan review for new developments with more than 5 parking spaces that might require a review of traffic, stormwater, water, or other public safety issues. Section 12 also includes 2 legally required sections. One for housing protocols that comply with the American with Disabilities Act, and 2, a review of certain nonprofit, a procedure to review certain nonprofit uses. This motion does not change the requirements for the review of site plans and special permits that were approved by a 78% majority in November. And this section does not confer or take away any rights regarding land use in our town. All of the changes proposed in the new Section 12 have been made upon the advice of legal counsel with the goal of making our zoning bylaw more up-to-date and legally defensible. And we thank you for your support of the motion under Article 3.
Thank you, Ms. Creighton. And I'll now recognize Sarah Mellish, the Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, for the ZBA's recommendation. Although we're going to discuss each of these proposed zoning amendments separately, I'm going to make an exception for Ms. Mellish and allow her to address all 3 at the same time. The ZBA took a single vote on all 3 articles, and this will simply allow her to state the board's recommendation without having to say the same thing 3 times.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, and thank you for coming. As Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, I want to explain what we do and why the zoning changes are important to us. We're responsible for approving exceptions under the zoning bylaw by issuing special permits and variances. Over 2/3 of the properties in Manchester are non-conforming, requiring the property owner to apply to the ZBA if they wish to change the footprint of structures on their property, a process that takes at least 5 months. We must weigh the bylaw, state law, and case law to reach a fair decision. It is very difficult and takes a lot of time now because the bylaw is so outdated. We always look at the impact an applicant's proposed changes may have on the neighborhood and changes conforming properties may make by right. Article 3 contains Section 12, which includes some changes to the special permit review criteria, but they are items we currently consider. It also extends the period for the lapse of a special permit to 3 years to be consistent with state law, and includes other changes consistent with case law and state law. Due to the votes at the special town meeting in November, there are currently no site plan review criteria for the Planning Board. There are many erroneous section references which will be corrected in Article 5. Every property owner is better served by having a complete and updated bylaw so they can understand the rules. The ZBA voted last Wednesday to unanimously support these bylaw changes. They may not be perfect, but it's time to move on from this 4-year project. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mellish. Is there discussion? Ms. Foley.
Hi, fellow residents. My name is Mary Foley, and I am in my 3rd term on the Planning Board. I have been involved with the zoning bylaw recodification process from the very beginning. While there have been some good parts to this process, there have been times when the board has not done their due diligence with fully vetting a changed or proposed bylaw. You will hear how the board has spent years on these, and that is true, but merely a lot of time spent does not equate to fully vetting for accuracies, pros and cons, unintended consequences, sample scenarios, etc. We can and should do better for residents. Article 3 proposes to replace our current Section 12 bylaw. This bylaw contains two of our most important land use tools, special permit and site plan review. Looking at special permit, our current special permit bylaw requires that a proposed use is not detrimental or injurious to the neighborhood and that all specified requirements are met. Adequacy of site, suitability of site, impacts on views and vistas, visual character of the neighborhood, protection of wildlife and natural resources, etc. It is a standalone bylaw that states all requirements must be met. The proposed Section 12 for special permit has its first criteria listed as, quote, standards set forth in Section 6.3. Bylaw 6.3 is performance standards for special permit and site plan that was voted in at last fall town meeting as a new bylaw that was to add further criteria to special permit and site plan review. But this proposed change before us tonight takes the meat out of the current special permit bylaw and relies on these 6.3 bylaw for standards. By creating this link with 6.3, which allows waiving of important criteria and standards by the ZBA or the planning board for special permits and site plan, in my opinion, this loosens up our very important standards. Why would we want to do this? What is currently broken that we are trying to fix? A fellow board member that is for this change to special permits and site plans said to me via email, I suspect that your fear, meaning my fear, is that some planning board might issue a permit with waivers that results in a badly designed project. Such a move would certainly lead to an appeal, and poor decisions would hopefully lead to the election of different members. I believe that zoning bylaws should protect against such poor decisions and protect all residents equally. Zoning bylaws should be predictable, and residents, applicants, developers should meet the threshold stated. Do you want these important requirement criteria waived for a project next door to you? Do you want to give the planning board or the ZBA members wider discretion over proposed projects in town? It has been repeated over the past, actually, I'll skip that paragraph. But with that said, I recommend that Article 3 be passed over or voted down, and that the planning board go back and fix some of these gaps that loosens our special permit and site plan standard. I also hope that fellow residents will allow all who wish to speak on this article and all other articles proposed tonight the right to speak and not cut off debate. Let the democratic process happen here in Manchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Foley. Ms. Creighton.
Two quick things in response to Mary's comments. The deliberate reorganizing of the bylaw moved those criteria into Section 6, which you approved in November. So we're not losing something. We're doing exactly what we were trying to do, which is remove duplication and redundancy. The other thing that is important to understand is just a quick check of some of the other towns' bylaws. Harvard, Hamilton, Concord, Ipswich have provisions for waivers in their bylaws and that use similar language. And the bylaw waiver language does require that any waiver be in the public interest and provide some specific criteria. Waivers are important in a small town because applications we review are so varied. We try to make the rules as tight as possible, but one size doesn't fit all. Let me give you two quick examples of sort of two common sense waivers that might be requested. I'm not prejudging whether the planning board would grant them. A small developer in downtown might ask to waive the requirement for a wildlife study. The planning board would have the discretion to allow that or not. Secondly, a new business might ask the planning board to waive requirements for the size of compact car parking spaces because their parking is only for trucks. Thank you. Can I ask, through the moderator, perhaps Jonathan, town council can also weigh in?
What subject would you like him to discuss?
I'll wait till.
Okay. Further discussion? Yes. Ms. Riesendorf.
Sylvia Friesenorp, 52 Masconomo Street. I have been following the planning board for some time now, thanks to our hybrid option. And I learned that it's hugely complex zoning, and that there are requirements from the state and a lot of things, a lot of variables that have to be taken into account. But there comes a time where we have to trust those people who know about this. The people who know about planning, the people who know about zoning, town council. And so I would really urge people to put some more trust in the deliberative processes that have been taken on, and trust that this is indeed the right thing to do. And as we heard before, it's time to move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Friesendorf. Further discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Isabella Bates, 2 Masconomo. I've heard over and over again in my life that the only thing that is certain is change, and that a great deal of suffering comes when you try to hold against change, because you will lose. And we can look at ocean rise, for example. We might not like it, but it's coming. So it seems to me that when we hear the word waiver, we think, oh my gosh, we're going to all go crazy with all sorts of new things. And I think there is a very clear, solid, deliberative process, but that we must allow for change to be built into the system in order for it to grow.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Mr. Skate.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have a general comment I'd like to make, but first I'd like to ask Ms. Creighton a technical question. Over the weekend, I spent a lot of time going through the draft we received from the town. I went down and got a copy. And I found tonight changes been made, but there's one in Article 6.5, which you said is something that's already been approved, and yet a change is being made here tonight. Did I misunderstand you when you said it had been approved at the last town meeting?
I'll recognize Ms. Creighton to answer your question, but first, Mr. Skates, could you give us your address, please?
Pardon?
Could you give us your address? We don't have your address.
Excuse me, 4 Boardman Avenue.
Thank you. Ms. Creighton.
I apologize, sir.
I have to thank the town clerk for reminding me.
The section 6.5 is will be considered under Article 4, and it's simple. We'll explain it if we get there. It was simply a safeguard in the event that Article 3 does not pass, because it simply deals with the issue of site plan review applicability.
In other words, if it doesn't pass...
Mr. Skates, excuse me. Wait for her to finish.
So if Article 3 passes, we will make a motion to pass over Article 4 and not consider it.
But if it doesn't pass, it'll go to this. So you're changing the number of cars that are required in a development according to the words. It says that you can have, before you'd had to have at least 10 spots, up to 10 spots. Now you only have to have 5 spots, is what the words say. And I'm surprised why you're doing that in something that you said was already approved.
Ms. Creighton?
I can only go by what's written.
Under Article 4, Section 6.5 would be a new section added to the existing Section 6. The amendment in your handout is broadening the applicability to more than 5 spaces rather than 5 to 10, because it would leave out applicability of any site with more than 10 spaces wouldn't be subject to site plan review. But that's Article 4, so maybe I should defer that.
We're going to end this discussion now, because we're not talking about Article 4.
Okay. And I'm sorry because when I went to town, they said that this one wouldn't change. That's the only reason I raised the issue. But what you are saying is it will change if the other doesn't pass.
We'll wait to talk about Article 4 when we get to it, Mr. Skates.
Okay.
Thank you.
My question and general observation, and the two prior speakers spoke about change. I grew up in an industry where change is essential. My business lived on change. When I began, our products took 2 years to make. When we sold our company, they took maybe 6 weeks to make. So change is essential. But I think it's very important that you control the change and not the change just be haphazard. And I believe that the complexity of this, having studied it and had outsiders study it, is very complicated, and I think it needs more work. No disrespect to the people, but I think that it should be reconsidered at a full town meeting in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skates. Further discussion? Yes, sir.
Kevin Leach, 33 Sum Street. I rise to make a motion that we pass over this article, Article 3. And if I get a second, I'll...
Well, you don't need a second because I'll rule that out of order. When I was in one of my first years as moderator 20-some years ago, I allowed an amendment to a main motion to pass over the article, and it was hopelessly confusing, and I promised I would never do it again.
So there's no passover
If you're
of Article 3?
If you're opposed to the motion under Article 3, you vote no. But I'm not going to allow an amendment to pass over when there's a main motion already on the floor.
Well, I agree with a previous speaker on several items. This is the third town meeting. As we mentioned, we've been doing this for a long time. And the last meeting that the planning board had, apparently it's up to 30 changes or fixes. And they're very complicated, complex. The people, at the timing of this special town meeting is bad only because so many people are already off on summer vacation, on Independence Week. And it's difficult to get through all of this stuff in the short period of time that we got them. See the spring tree, and there are proposed zoning changes that are characterized as administrative. And this is administrative law, and administrative law has the force of law. And I don't think there's any rush that we need to change this tonight, and could probably move this forward to the fall special town meeting. Some of the Article 3 call for lowering the standards for special permits. The proposed bylaw says they only need to have adequate utilities and eliminates the requirement to be suitable for use on sites. There are phrases in there that say climate resiliency and adaptation, which is an undefined standard. And I think that if you're writing law, you need to have specific definitions about the words that are in the law. And as is done in many of the state statutes, the first beginning of Section 1 of many state statutes gives a list of definitions of the terms used.
Mr. Leach, you're over 2 minutes. I'd ask you to wrap up, please.
I would vote no for this.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes.
Excuse me, I'm Sandy Bodmer-Turner. I live at 89 School Street. And I would like to address the point that the prior two gentlemen and Ms. Foley raised about what's broken. And I would like to give you my view about what's broken and why action is needed urgently. And that is that I have watched the town change in the 24 years that we've lived here. where it was a mix of people of different incomes and different occupations. And what's happened one by one is that houses that could accommodate, families of modest means have been smacked down, and poof, what happens next is a $2 million, $3 million property. And I would like to see the planning board freed from all the, specific, let's get the semicolon right in the right place, and given reasonable power over development in the town so we can shape the town the way the master plan and the citizens of the town agreed to do, which was to have more housing of varied types.
Thank you, Ms. Bodnar-Turner. Further discussion? Mr. Keefe. I think that mic isn't working.
I'll just try this one if it works. Test. Yep. Sorry. John Keefe, 8 Victoria Road. First, I want to congratulate the planning board, because this time when they're making the changes, we did a compare and contrast. So it was great to be able to see what we had and what we're suggesting we change. And I think most of the changes, I think everybody probably agrees, are pretty logical. Some of the points that were made, I think, are very important, though, to bring up. And so I'll just quickly, because I'm going to pull the hook out. I'd like to make motion to change some of the language in Article 3. Article 12.5.2, numerate 1 says standards set forth in 6.3. I'd like to change that to say standards set forth in section 6.3, excluding the last sentence of 6.3.2 with respect to waivers for special permits, and excluding 6.3.13 with respect to waivers for special permits.
Mr. Keefe, do you have that in writing?
I sure do.
Could I have it, please? Because I can't write that fast.
Okay. My problem is I've got two other ones. So how do you want me to proceed? I only have one copy.
You can give it to me when you're finished.
Okay, great. Also move to change the 12.5.2 and re-add back in the existing special permit requirements, which state at the site will be adequacy of the site in terms of size for the proposed use, and re-add back in suitability of the site for the proposed use. Those are in the existing section 12, but just want to bring those over. We dropped them in the new proposed section. And I move to eliminate and social structures in 12.5.2, numerate 5. It now reads neighborhood character and social structures. I recommend or move that we change it to just neighborhood character. I don't know what a social structure is, and I'm fearful that it's some political agenda that I'm not aware of. If it's not defined, I'd like to remove that. And the fourth motion is to eliminate 12.5.3, numerate 8, which says climate resiliency and adaptation. That's a very generic set of words. I don't understand what that means. Right now, the state is saying you have to wire houses for electricity for the future. If that's what we're talking about, I think it's a bad idea. We need to define what climate resiliency is. It's a good idea, great idea, but I think we need to define it before we make it part and parcel of our requirements. And the rationale for the waivers is that we passed last fall the 6.3, section 6, with a lot of requirements, performance standards for lighting, noise, topography, et cetera, et cetera. When you go for a special permit, those requirements we just voted for should not be relaxed. They should not be waived. They should be enforced and held, because we're holding a special permit to a higher standard than a site plan review, which is where this language comes from, which is the two recommendations to remove that waiver language to begin with. Again, I'm probably out of my time, but relative to adding those two other clauses back in, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Again, I don't know what social structures are, but I don't think that should be part of our bylaw, that we're ordaining that we're going to impose social structures. I'm not sure what that even means. And again, I think we just need to work on climate redundancy and adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keefe. Thank you, Mr. Keefe. Let me just see if I can make sense of this. Pardon me? It would be more helpful if you had the line numbers in it, but I just need to. I'm just comparing what you gave me to the existing bylaw.
These are the 3 line numbers that he's changed.
Okay, just a second.
Refresh back to 6.3.
I understand. Bear with me for a minute, I just want to check these references. Yep. So for the 2 existing requirements under section 12.5.2 that you want to add, Mr. Keefe, where do you want to put those?
Right now, I think there's 9 subsections under 12.5.2 for the requirements of special permit. I'm suggesting we delete number 8, which is the climate adaptation resiliency, because it's undefined. That would relieve 8, and you could tag those on as 9 and 10, if it would be my recommendation, I guess, for simplicity.
Okay.
But you could replace 8 with one of those and add a 10, however you care to do it. But yeah, you have to renumber them slightly.
Okay. I just want to be sure that when we vote, we know what we're voting on. And the other one would be to delete from number 5, 12.5.2, number 5, and social structures. Is that right? Okay. Do you know what those are? Okay, Ms. Creighton, I'm gonna give you the. Thank you, Ms. Mellish. Ms. Mellish points out that we don't have a second on Mr. Keefe's amendment. Is that seconded? Okay, it's seconded.
General Tenor. Thank you. So, thank you very much. So I guess my biggest point is so many of you that have been critics of this process have over and over criticized us about rushing. And now, after public hearings, 2 public forums, we're going to have an amendment that changes everything that hasn't been thought about comprehensively. So I caution us about interjecting things. Secondly, this is part of a comprehensive review. We moved site plan review and special permit criteria into Section 6. Section 6 is not before us. But Section 6 is 14 pages. Section 6.3 is 14 pages of details. And I am going to just, with your permission, Mr. Moderator, clarify that they are to, where is it? Sorry. Just had it. Just had it here. Do I have it? Sorry. I just want to read. I just mixed up my page numbers. Sorry. That site that is to maximize to the extent feasible, the proposed developments shall be located or designed to preserve and enhance natural features, topography, avoid disturbance of existing mature ventilation, be environmentally sensitive areas, minimize alteration of natural features, preserve, enhance, I'm just paraphrasing, scenic points, viewpoints, historic buildings, places, and similar community assets which add value and attractiveness to development of the town, and so forth. The standards in this 14 pages address lighting, traffic, pedestrian and vehicle access, pedestrian and bicycle access, aesthetics, noise, topographic changes, utilities, and fiscal considerations. So there is a comprehensive set. The planning board is not willy-nilly, just like not ignoring these things. And so I think that the implication that we would cast 14 pages of rules and regulations that we worked hard on to the wind is not accurate. In terms of social structures, perhaps there's a better word, but I think it means, is there a park or a gathering place? Do people, are people building close to the street or further back to the street so people maybe can trick or treat there as they have been accustomed to, perhaps on Brook Street? Those are the kinds of things that you might talk about, that you would use and to say, put your parking in the back of the house and move your house to the front of the street, or vice versa, or whatever's the appropriate thing, because the tenor of, let's say, Brook Street is to trick or treat on the street, have people trick or treat there. It's part of the fabric of the community. And as for climate resilience, we're a coastal town, and climate resilience, we have a lot of people in town who are working on those issues, and one of the things is the materials for pavement. We want to allow water to run through and not run off of pavement. There are many standards that are well established. It's a evolving area for sure, but it's something that we certainly want to reflect in our zoning. So I would urge us to vote no on the amendments. Let's get done what we tried to do back in November and we're trying to do tonight. Let's finish this up. As Isabella Bates said, it's not perfect, but let's wrap this up and talk about important things like climate resilience and great planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Creighton. Thank you. Yes, sir. We're not getting the mic, I think.
Hi, Mr. Moderator. Adam Zager, 21 Union Street.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Adam Zager,
Thank you.
21 Union Street. I had a point of order. May I make a motion to amend Mr. Keefe's amendment?
Well, you can.
Great. Because I'd like to make a motion. I think the planning board has done just an amazing job working on these. I'm a real estate attorney. I've been practicing for over 20 years. These bylaws, the updated bylaw is consistent with what other towns have. I think it makes a lot of sense. It adds a lot of additional factors that the ZBA and the planning board can consider for special permits. So I'd like to move to amend Mr. Keefe's amendment by striking it entirely and making only one amendment to this document. In section 12.5.5, line 141, the word shall. This provision says that when appropriate, the Zoning Board of Appeals, Select Board, or Planning Board, while serving as the special permit granting authority, shall refer a special permit application to the Board of Health, Conservation Commission, or the Department of Public Works for written comments. I think that shall should be changed to may. I think that it opens up a lot of
trouble and confusion sometimes if we impose a requirement on these boards that, when it's appropriate, they have to make these referrals. I think it should be up to their wise judgment. I think that any special permit that's granted could end up being challenged if they didn't. So I think it raises too many questions, and I think this is a great document. It just needs that one, I would recommend that one change, and I would suggest that we undo the proposed amendment from Mr. Keefe and replace it with just that simple change, to change the word shall in line 141 to may, and I think we'd have a great document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zager. Further discussion? Ms. Morse.
My name is Jody Morse, 11 Jersey Lane. I just want to back up what Mrs. Creighton talked about from the standpoint that a lot of work has gone into this, and the idea of passing over it and also amending it. I mean, I tried to take some notes as to what Mr. Keefe was talking about, and it just seems very nitpicking, to tell you the truth. Social structures, we don't know the definition of climate resiliency. I think we all know what that means in terms of issuing a special permit. So a lot of the changes are to this section as it relates to special permits. And I think in general, those are things that we have to have judgment of our planning board. And the addition of having waivers. I think the examples that Mrs. Creighton gave make perfect sense, that you're going to waive certain things that don't even apply to a particular permit. So my argument here is that we should stick with the original article, and we should pass it tonight. We can wordsmith this to death. We could wordsmith this for years. There's no reason that we can't tweak it, make it better, but we have a set of zoning laws right now that are completely out of date, very confusing, hard to administer, and tonight we have the opportunity of fixing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morse. Thank you. Mr. Warnock. Bob, excuse me, Mr. Warnock. Some of these microphones aren't working. Okay, but since you're at this mic, we'll let you go there.
Running? Okay, there. Ken Warnock, 5 Running Ridge. I would like to move the original motion if possible, and would request any advice on how to do that.
Well, you can move the question, which is the motion to cut off debate. We have 2 amendments before us which have been seconded, and so we'll have to deal with each of those amendments. And that gets a little complicated, but if we get there, I'll explain it. But you're moving the question, I take it, as to all the
I'd
amendments.
like to move the question, however, just to avoid adding more amendments.
Is that seconded?
Narrow us down our choices.
It's seconded. That's
you.
the motion to cut off debate. It's seconded, more than once. Is a second, a third?
Second squared.
Excuse me? I thought it was.
It was.
I don't think it was.
So we have Mr. Zager's motion. The assertion is that it was not seconded. That's not my recollection, but is it seconded? It's seconded, thank you. Please state your point of order. Would you go to the mic, please?
No.
I certainly will. I'm going to explain exactly what we're voting on when we get there, but right now we're moving to cut off debate. Are you ready? Motion for the previous question? Yeah. Mr. Bowling?
Excuse me, I think it's a point of order, actually. We haven't had any opportunity here from the boards what the impact of Mr. Zager's proposed amendment would be.
What, I don't understand your question.
Well, Mr. Zager proposed an amendment to the first motion, but there wasn't any debate on it, and none of the boards responded to the impact of what might happen if we approved Mr. Zager's motion.
Okay, well, Mr. Zager's motion was to delete all of Mr. Keefe's amendment and to change one word in 12.5 excuse me, just let me finish, 12.5.5. And I think your point is well taken, that we should probably hear from Ms. Creighton as to what the impact of that is. Ms. Creighton.
Well, I think deleting returning to the proposal and striking the word shall in line 149 and changing it to may, I think is a summary.
Yes.
Is, I think, perfectly fine by the board. The shall is actually qualified by when appropriate. And the shall, to refer the permit application to those boards is really to get their input, which we would do as a matter of course, whether it says may or shall. So I think it's not a problem. Mr. Ziegler's amendment to the amendment would not be problematic.
Okay, now we have a motion to cut off debate on the floor. It's been seconded, and with the exception of points of order, we're not going to have any further discussion. Yes. So this is a motion to cut off debate on both amendments and the main motion. That's a 2/3 vote. If you're in favor of cutting off debate, press 1, opposed, press 2, and abstain, press 3. And the voting period is open. And the vote is 209 to 21 against, with 1 abstention, so that prevails by more than 2/3. So let me get organized here. What was it? Thank you. Okay, so I will do my best to make it clear what we're voting on now. We have before us, we take them in the reverse order in which they were made. So we vote first on Mr. Zager's amendment. And that amendment would be to strike all of Mr. Keefe's amendment and to add in section 12.5.5 at line 141, not to add, but to change the word shall to the word may. Everybody clear on what we're voting on now? So the way this works is when we have 2 amendments before us, think of it as a sports tournament. In round 1, amendment number 2 goes up against the first amendment. And whichever one of those prevails, that becomes the amendment to the main motion. We then have to vote again on the motion either as Mr. Keefe originally proposed it or as amended by Mr. Zager's motion. And then finally, once we know how that goes, we then go back and vote on the main motion either as amended or as originally stated. Everybody clear on that? It's been confusing in the past. Okay. So we're going to vote now on Mr. Zager's amendment, which would be to strike all of Mr. Keefe's amendment and substitute the word may for the word shall in 12.5.5. Everybody clear? Okay. We're clearing the slide. Okay. All right, so we're voting now on Mr. Zager's amendment. That's a simple majority vote. If you're in favor, press 1, opposed, press 2, abstain, press 3, and the voting period is open. And the vote is 171 in favor, 57 opposed, with one abstention, sorry. So Mr. Zager's amendment prevails by a majority. Now comes the confusing part. We're now going to vote on Mr. Keefe's amendment as we just amended it with Mr. Zager's amendment. So we're voting again on Mr. Zager's amendment, but now it's taking the place of Mr. Keefe's amendment. Everybody clear? No. Okay. We just voted, we have to vote on both amendments and the main motion. We just voted essentially to substitute Mr. Zager's for Mr. Keefe's. We now have to vote on the First Amendment as we just changed it. Is that clear? Okay. No, it does exist. It now exists as changed by the previous vote. No? But the process is we have to vote on both amendments. We just changed Mr. Keefe's amendment by substituting Mr. Zager's. But we can't just leave that First Amendment out there hanging in space. We have to vote on it too. And we have to vote on it as we just changed it. We're now voting on Mr. Zager's amendment a second time.
That's the
Well, what we've just done is to change Mr. Keefe's amendment. We struck out everything he wanted to put in, and we added may instead of shall. That's what we've done, and that's now before us again. I know it seems counterintuitive, but that's the rule we have to follow. One more time? Okay. Think of it as the Boston Celtics versus the New York Nets. They went up against each other in the first round, and the Celtics won. They now go into round 2, and they have to win again. And then they get to the finals, and they have to win again. Does that help? Ms. Creighton, point of order?
Mr. Moderator, if I may, I think we're now voting on an amendment to change line 141 to may instead of shall. And that's just an amendment to the main motion. And then the main motion, if this prevails, will be amended, and we will vote on that. Am I correct?
That's right. Thank you, Ms. Creighton. Would you like to be moderator?
No.
All right, so now we're going to vote on substituting may for shall. Everybody clear? Yes. Okay. No. Mr. Zager's amendment. We're just fixing the slide. So again, this is a simple majority. If you're in favor of Mr. Zager's amendment, again, press 1. If you're opposed, press 2. And if you abstain, press 3. And the voting period is open. Voting is closed. It's 174 yes, 54 no, with 1 abstention. So that now becomes the main motion, And believe it or not, we have to vote on it one more time. So we're now voting on Ms. Creighton's motion as it was amended by Mr. Zager's amendment, changing the word shall to may. No, this is the main motion. I just want to mention, happily for me, our rules preclude us from having 3 amendments to one main motion at any given time. So we'll never have that problem. Okay, so we're voting now on the main motion as presented by Ms. Creighton and as amended by Mr. Zager. And this is a 2/3 vote under the Zoning Enabling Act. If you're in favor of that, press 1. If you're opposed, press 2. Abstain, press 3. Voting is open. The vote is 100. (182 to 43 with 2 abstentions), and the motion prevails by more than 2/3. Thank you for your patience with my explanation. So, Article 4 is there only in the event that we didn't adopt the motion under Article 3. And so, Sarah Creighton moves to pass over, take no action under Article 4. Ron Mastrogiacomo seconds the motion. This is a simple majority to pass over. Meeting ready to vote? If you're in favor, press 1. Opposed, 2. Abstain, press 3. And voting is open. Vote is 191 yes, 11 no, with 5 abstentions. It prevails by a majority. Article 5. Christopher Only makes the motion under Article 5 as printed in the handout at pages 19 through 27. Sarah Creighton seconds the motion. And this is also a 2/3 vote under the Zoning Enabling Act. The Planning Board has held the required hearing and recommends approval. Remarks, Mr. Olney.
Well, good evening. I have the more pleasant task of presenting Article 5 for consideration. Article 5 is an admission that the Planning Board is not perfect, and I think probably we can get 2/3 majority on that vote. This article involves fixing typos and referencing errors that resulted from changes to the zoning bylaw that were adopted in recent town meetings. In fact, over the course of 5 town meetings, the town has considered and passed articles to renumber, reword, modernize, and delete obsolete portions of the original zoning bylaw. This rewriting of the bylaw over these years has resulted in hundreds of new and changed cross-references between sections. Each reference to another section is important, but in spite of careful review by many, we still missed a few. This article fixes them. None of these fixes will have an impact on the intent or meaning of the zoning bylaw. All of these changes are listed in a simple table that was prepared by town council, and the corrections are clearly shown. The table is included in the handout and is on page 19. It's been available on the town website. By adopting this single article, all of these changes can be properly made in one single vote. There is only one change that at first glance might look like it's a substantive change. It's the striking of language in Section 10, which includes the groundwater protection overlay district bylaw. But on closer examination, you'll see that the language to be deleted in Section 10.3.1 has got nothing to do with groundwater. It is a misplaced wording about granting special permits within the LCD, and it already exists in Section 5 of the bylaw where it belongs. Somehow it was replicated and the copied language was erroneously stuck into Section 10, and it should be deleted. Now you might ask if these are the last of the typos. and misreferences to be corrected. We certainly hope so, but some have been caught as recently as this week, and more are likely to be placed before you in future town meetings. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Olney. Is there discussion? Meeting ready to vote? This is a 2/3 vote under the Zoning Enabling Act. If you're in favor, press 1, opposed, press 2, abstain, 3, and voting is open. The vote is 200 yes, 9 no, with 2 abstentions, and it prevails by more than 2/3. Article 6. And John Round makes the motion as stated in the handout under Article 6 at page 3, and Becky Jakes seconds the motion. Remarks, Mr. Round.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I think fire trucks are a little more understandable than zoning bylaws. Good evening to you all. Our current ladder truck is 22 years old. It's got several more years of useful life, but its diesel engine has been unable to pass the required Massachusetts state emissions standards test. We are borrowing a spare pumper truck from Boston to cover for our ladder pumper truck, which is now out of service. We plan to sell our ladder pumper truck to a fire department in a state with less stringent emissions requirements where it will have some value. But we've got a plan for a replacement. Each year, as part of our capital budget, we have been putting aside funds for the purchase of new fire apparatus. This fire apparatus fund currently stands at $1.32 million. A new ladder pumper truck is very expensive, as much as $1.5 million. By selling our mini pumper, which has been deemed less useful, for $180,000, we'll have the needed $1.5 million total of dollars that we need for a new ladder truck. We'll seek a used one or a demo, at least for the start of our search. Further, we're rescinding the vote to purchase a new second ambulance, which would have used $450,000 of that fire apparatus fund monies, because we can outfit our current pumper truck with all of the medical equipment needed to make non-transport advanced life support calls. So our pumper truck can serve a dual role, making for efficient use of our fire apparatus. When we're all done, all 3 of our frontline vehicles, the ambulance, the pumper truck, which will be outfitted to make these advanced life support calls, and a newly acquired ladder pumper truck will be current and fully useful. A pickup truck for all-terrain use and the chief's response car round out the department's fleet. We recommend your approval for Article 6.
Thank you, Mr. Round. Is there discussion? Mr. Keefe.
John Keefe, 8 Victoria Road. So I've had a lot of cars over the years. Why don't we just replace the diesel engine, use the pumper truck as you just suggested, and save, I don't know, sounds like $1 million.
Mr. Round? Go ahead. Mr. Federspiel?
So we did contemplate that, and the conclusion was that for the cost of the new engine, you wouldn't get enough life out of the rest of the vehicle. So the vehicle's life is close to being expired. If it has 2-3 more years, that's probably what it has. So to put a new engine in, the conclusion was that it would be more efficient to go ahead with a new one instead.
Thank you, Mr. Federspiel. Further discussion? Meeting ready to vote? This is a simple majority. If you're in favor, press 1, opposed, press 2, abstain, press 3. Voting is open. $196 in favor, 12 against, With one abstention, the motion prevails. Article 7, Catherine Bellata moves and Brian Solacey seconds the article as presented in the warrant. Remarks, Ms. Bellata.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So Article 7 is to, we're asking you to raise and appropriate the sum of $50,000 for a salary reserve account for fiscal year '24. And the reason we're asking for this amount, even though we just approved a budget in the spring, is because at the time of the Springtown meeting, contracts with the DPW and clerical unions were still being negotiated, and we didn't know exactly what the salary increases would be. Those contracts have now been settled, and by approving Article 7, that will allow us to give those town employees their salary increases at the start of the fiscal year next week, rather than approving a budget at a later town meeting and then paying them in arrears. In addition, we're forecasting some additional overtime is needed for the fire department for the first 2 weeks of July. And this is due to some timing of the training of some new firefighters that we have coming on board. Their training for full firefighting certification won't be complete until mid-July, so their ability to serve on certain shifts is a little bit variable right now, so we need a little more overtime in the fire department for the first 2 weeks in July, and all of those items total $50,000. So we ask for your approval.
Thank you, Ms. Bellata. Is there discussion? Meeting ready to vote? If you're in favor, press 1, opposed, press 2, abstained, press 3, and voting period is open. The vote is 197 in favor, 9 opposed, with no abstentions, so the motion prevails. And Ann Harrison moves to dissolve the special town meeting, and John Round seconds the motion. If you're in favor of dissolving, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's a unanimous vote. I so declare it. I declare the special town meeting dissolved. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much for coming.